Sorry for that little problem there. Can you hear? Yeah. Sorry for that little problem there. Can you hear me again now?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So we continue. Sorry about it. So now there are criteria by which Charles Fourier wanted to evaluate the French Revolution, especially through the vast scheme of the psychology, designed to govern every phase of the social and the industrial life. So therefore, Charles Fourier, he wanted to see French Revolution from various aspects, so to say. So first of all, he spoke of the scheme of God's social code. You know, he talked about God's social code, which means what is the desire of God, especially while we live in the society, while we associate ourselves with other social aspects of our life. And that is because he felt that the Creator had just placed it in juxtaposition with the natural laws. So he believed that God, when he created man, when he created the society, he has, juxtaposed it, or he has, he has put together the natural laws of physical universe as revealed by Isaac Newton. That's why he believed that he is somebody who has invented the law of social interaction, the law of social, the law of natural attraction. So therefore he says that God has his own social code, while maybe the French Revolution are trying to change that, or trying to inspire new ideas about it, yet the law of God is as equal to the law of nature, just as what Isaac Newton has spoken about. So you see, the revolutionary method of the French Revolution was contrary to what Fourier envisioned, because Fourier himself, he envisioned an orderly and fastidious nature outside or aside from all intellectual deductions, concerning this splendor of man's natural character. He believed that nature has it in itself that society will evolve. You see, so therefore, if there is to be an evolution of society, this has to be orderly. This has to be fastidious. Or rather, Charles Fourier, he believed that this intellectual discerning, which is talking about the splendor of man's natural or man's moral character, will definitely evolve in itself. So therefore, he would definitely oppose these methods in any case, or he would oppose the method of the revolution in any case, because his meticulous precision of life, his experience in life has already suggested to him, the kind of vandalism that the revolution has adopted are in no good. So therefore, excuse me, he used the word like harmony to describe his ideal regime, and how his ideal regime is not necessarily just a mere reaction to the horror and suffering that he had himself undergone, that society has undergone and witnessed. It was rather a very fiber of which he was woven, or he is trying to weave a society that is determined to actually welcome changes in its natural sense. So therefore, Charles Fourier's reaction to French Revolution, you can say, therefore, is a reflection of his experience his philosophical criteria, or his philosophical ideas, his philosophical development, and his general character by himself. You see, uh, uh, although it is not necessary that Charles Fourier, in his writing, constantly talk about alternative to the French Revolution, but his ideas are, incidentally fragmented, dispersed, and all his volumes actually try to bring about the doctrine, the mainstream of his doctrine, yet they are dispersed in nature. And therefore, what we try to do in this class is to try to bring these ideas together, to see what actually Charles Fourier is talking about. How is he responding to the French Revolution? So first of all, you see, the French Revolution has a slogan, very important slogan, most boasted slogan, called liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty, equality, and fraternity is also something that has been adopted in our constitution. And you see, Charles Fourier saw this as a pompous grand casket. It is a kind of pride, at that point in time, in the name of free man, in the name of people should be free, people should be liberated, people should be free, people should have the sense of fraternity, which means brotherhood. But Charles Fourier believed that this contained contradictions of terms, equality and fraternity, and Fourier insisted are antithetical to liberty. Because if we talk about equality, or if we talk about liberty, then Charles Fourier is saying, if you talk about anybody can do anything, then where is that equality? If you talk about liberty, then there is no question of fraternity, or there is no question of brotherhood. So therefore, the futile pursuit of liberty, he says, are fragile, and the futile pursuit of liberty has been one of the most tragic blunders, made by our century. This is what Charles Fourier says, that one of the most futile pursuit of liberty is the most tragic blunder made by our century, by that particular period of his history. So Fourier, he believed that this idea of liberty, or the slogan for liberty, has cost Europe 4 million lives. 4 million lives have lost during the revolution, the wars of the empires, and so on and so forth. So those who sang its praises, he says, those who talk about liberty could not define it, nor did they know what it was, for they were simplest. Oh, they just believe their idea is very simple, and they saw only the obvious facet of the many-sided, many-sided concept. So, because liberty is not that, it's not that small concept. It is, and therefore, if you bring liberty, equality, and fraternity, they conflict with each other. So, liberty to the revolutionists meant little more than simple corporeal freedom. He says, actual meaning of liberty is not the concern of the French revolutionaries, but rather the corporeal freedom is the concern of the French revolutionaries. Otherwise, they will not club it together with equality and fraternity. So, so therefore, the workers and the salaried people, they possess only degree of the liberty. You see, these people who are getting their salary, they are bound by social chains, just as slaves, he says, are bound by physical ones. So they are bound because those the workers, the salaried people, they cannot simply say today that no, I will stop working. No, I cannot. They cannot do that. No, I will work from home like we are doing now. will work online. No, they cannot do that. So therefore, that corporeal freedom is what Charles Fourier is saying is the meaning of liberty for the French revolutionists. So they are bound by various kind of changes, just like the slaves are bound by physical change. They are also bound by the social economic change. So therefore, he says, true liberty must guarantee to everyone a minimum subsistence, the privileges of leagues to protect this minimum, a freedom from anxiety, and in case of necessity, the right of theft to appease hunger. If that is liberty, then that is real liberty. That's what Charles Fourier is talking about. He says, I repeat again, true liberty must guarantee everyone a minimum subsistence, the privileges of leagues to protect this minimum. That minimum means of subsistence, the freedom from anxiety, which means whether I will be able to retain this job or I will not be able to retain this job, whether I will have food tomorrow or I will not have food tomorrow, anxiety whether I will be happy with my family or not happy with my family, and in case of necessity, the right of theft to appease hunger. He says liberty means if I know that I'm going to go hungry without food, then I should have the right to even steal. Right to even steal. So it must also include the complete release of all psychological forces underlying human behavior, and for this reason it is indivisible. He says, therefore it is indivisible. So if you are talking about liberty, then liberty should go to this extent where I'll have control over my psychological forces underlying my behavior, and therefore it is indivisible. So therefore, he was in some way dogmatic in insisting that God denied approval of that freedom which does not extend alike to all persons. So he believed that that kind of freedom which does not extend alike to all people, which means which everyone cannot enjoy equally, that kind of freedom God will not approve. Because if it doesn't equally allow people to enjoy, then that is not freedom at all. That is not liberty at all. Rather, that kind of liberty will only encourage intensive competitions. It will only lead to a society where the rich, the powerful will control over the poor people. So the revolutionist, he says, he complained, exclude half of humanity from the outset, for they did not listen to the burden of women, to women one iota. Or Charles Fourier is someone who talked about women emancipation. He believed that although the revolutionists or the French revolution talk about liberty, equality, fraternity, yet they did not include women, which means they did not include half of humanity. So, so he says that these levelers who talk about social relationship, they fail to abolish even the prevalent prejudices concerning love and marriage, and that. And therefore that one mistake alone would have caused the revolution to flounder and wrecked, he says. So since the French revolutionary did not talk about the liberty of women, how they are subjugated in the institution of marriage and family, how they have, you see, because of the idea of marriage and family, they are being subjugated. Since they do not talk about that, this revolution is going to flounder, is going to wreck, is going to fall. Finally, he said, had liberty been obtained without counterweight, without struggle, without having to lose so much of life, it would have led to anarchy, For in our civilization, he says, liberty is only a germ of sedition and disorder. This is a germ of sedition and disorder, which means when the revolutionary talk about liberty, it is a kind of sedition, it is a kind of instigating the authority, it's a kind of bringing disorder in the society. So therefore, unfortunately, the French Revolution's pitiable failure, or the failure of the French Revolution goals, you see, caused the rest of Europe itself to be deprived of whatever measure freedom it might otherwise have enjoyed. You see, he says, because of the kind of disorder that the French Revolution has brought about, it has caused the whole of Europe to suffer. So therefore, the concept of liberty in the French Revolution provoke in Fourier an intermingled feeling of disgust and regret. He was really disgusted with the nature of the French Revolution, the method they used, and he regretted that their doctrine of equality has aroused so much of intolerance, and he felt that man is by instinct the implacable, implacable enemy of his absurd chimera, which means man is by instinct the implacable enemy of his own self, of his own own image. So therefore, he argued that God would admit of no equality in heaven, man have none of it on earth, for inequalities are necessary to make the wheels of industry hum. So what Charles Fourier is trying to say, the kind of equality we are talking about is not the kind of equality that God would have allowed in heaven, because man must have, since man did not have this actual equality on earth, for inequalities are necessary to make the wheels of industry move, therefore he will not approve of such equality. So therefore, you see, in Charles Fourier Utopian Association, or what do you call, the phalanx, the people are composed of men and women possessing very unequal fortunes. For here he wanted to experiment that it can only be in such a way that proper balance can be attained. So it is there that Charles Fourier want to see whether the equality can be experimented or equality can be practiced or not. And the rich and the poor can really become the best friends or not when they are united by bonds of industrial interest. So if we have industrial interest, whether the rich and the poor can work together or not. So he says nothing stimulates the poor, obscure worker, like being teamed with a very wealthy one in an industrial intrigue whose purpose is to outproduce another team. So if the rich and the poor can work together, then maybe that will stimulate the poor to work harder in the environment of competition. So he even gave the example of Louis XVI and his good-natured boasting about his skill at the humble trade of locksmithing and so on and so forth. So he says this was actually what Louis XVI did was actually just a friendly gesture towards those who plied the trade seriously. And in a more advanced society, he says the king might have belonged to the locksmithing team, which means the king should have come from among the people, much to the delight and benefit of everybody who are concerned. So therefore, he says these are the natural functions of inequalities. So if there is equality, equality should come from within and not necessarily being juxtaposed and not necessarily being forced on the people. So fraternity, according to Fourier's critique, remained a dream despite the wreckage of revolution. and we can still observe in our society. You see, he wrote in 2029 16 different social classes. He says there are 16 social classes, each of which manifests bitter hatred of all those above it, while also heaping scorn and contempt on all those beneath. So there are 16 social classes, and they are in contempt with each other. They are against each other. And such is the sweet fraternity for which men went to scaffold and field of battle. This is the kind of inequality, this is the kind of struggle that they have in between. Yet they went to war together, they went to battle together, and the revolutionary moralist would have us picture ourselves a great family of brothers. But he says this doctrine is devoid of any sense in society whose rich share with the poor neither their blessings nor their good fortune. Which means, in real sense, such fraternity are only fake. Such fraternity are only put up by those in power. Because in real sense, neither the rich would respect the poor or bless the poor, nor would share the fortune, nor the poor would actually be so happy that the rich are doing this. So now, the next slogan of the French Revolution is the slogan of right of man. So Charles Fourier, he said, I quote, okay, I take this quotation, he says, one boasts that even the indictment of man is free, and that he enjoys the imprescriptible right of the citizen, whereas he has neither the liberty to work nor the authority to demand the employment upon which his subsistence depends. Although we are talking and saying that man is enjoying his right of citizen, but he says, that man is free to do whatever, man is equal, man can work together, yet he says, man he has neither the liberty to work, he can neither work when he wants to work, nor does he have the authority to demand he can work for his own subsistence, for his own livelihood, for his own survival. If he begs, he must be imprisoned to defend the good name of free man. You see, if he begs, then he is a seditious man, and his imprescriptible right has to be taken away. All he really needs is the right to work. So which means he says, let's stop talking about the right of man. Let us at least give man the right to work, the right to subsistence, the right to life, which means the right to be able to survive. So therefore, in this particular context, Charles Fourier charges, at the even at the Republican Constitution, which came out of the revolution, he had two important charges against them, or he has two important charges about any Republican constitution. First, these constitutions, he says, were not honest guarantee of well-being promised by the florid wording or the flowery wording. Although the Republican constitution talk about the equality of man, although it talk about fraternity, the liberty, equality and fraternity, yet these are just mere flowery words put into the constitution, which actually can neither actually guarantee to the citizens. So these documents were only legal, designed by men of ulterior motive for the purpose of deceiving people. So which means that the liberty, equality and fraternity are only for deceiving people. And Charles Fourier, he believed that all the constitutions of mankind would soon crumble and fall if they were not sustained by hangman and the gallows. Which means all this idea of liberty, equality and fraternity would have been crumbled, or would have just fall apart if there was no environment created with the idea of fear against the authority. That means fear against hangman and gallows, fear against the law of the land, the strict law of the land. So therefore, there is no sincere purpose laid behind this creation. He says there's no indication that there is an environment created for people to really be free. That is why Charles Fourier insisted by the fact that they were invariably violated 20 times in the first year by those charged with their defense and enforcement. This idea of this idea of republican constitution is actually not genuine. So the representative system too, he says, was misnomer, just for the purpose of representation. For he says women were entirely excluded from excluded from voting, and they are excluded from holding office, while only a small fraction of men also enjoyed the suffrage, because at that point of time even the question of suffrage was limited. So the mass election, he says, was a mere tool to intrigue, and this was created, and this in many ways created class discord and propagated bias, or propagated hatred, propagated suspicion among the people. So he even cited Napoleon Bonaparte and Joseph Fourier as specially skilled masters of that particular deceit, which they created. So he says these men artfully concealed their mental reservations and perfidious intention, which means he is trying to say that in such disguise, you see, the whole idea of revolution was pushed forward, but all these are impractical and they may not actually they cannot actually be implemented. The second aspect Charles of the French Revolution is the government created by the French Revolution and or the Republican Constitution, or rather you can say the kind of government that was created, that was brought about after the French Revolution in the form of the Republican government. He says, Charles Fourier says that legislation, the first power of government, is an attribute of God rather than man. The idea of legislation or creating law, creating rules and regulation, is an attribute of God rather than that of man. Man has just actually taken this from the law of nature, because God has created the law of nature, and therefore this has to be the attribute of God. Its assumption by the revolutionaries, was an act, he says, therefore, of irreligion, or the fact that they don't believe in God. The fact that the French Revolution talk about legislature or legislation as the source of law, this is incorrect, he says, because that is because the French Revolution was more irreligion. Because if one believes in the universality of God's providence, he says, he ought also to believe his social code. Which means if we say that we are someone who believe in God, then we have to believe what is the social code. And from the moment it shall be discovered, there will be no further need for legislatures. So therefore, legislation is actually a natural process, and it is to be attributed to God. So if you talk of again of legislation, then we have to say that this is inspired by God, rather than if you say that we are going to bring about legislation because we are against the kind of social order that God has created, then it is irrelevant. The second power of civilized government according to the French Revolution, or according to the whatever came out of revolution, is the executive, and this is one to which man ought to devote his deepest concerns. You know, and therefore the revolutionists, on the other hand, they overturned the throne, executed the king, and eliminated the executive branch of government. Therefore, the result was succession of calamitous occurrence, which provided the whole course of experimentation in government, to have been grave error. He says, it is a grave error to, execute the rulers, and to remove the executive. So the legislative and judicial power, furthermore, they engaged themselves in jurisdictional struggle without third power of balance of forces. So therefore, the centralized government created by the French Revolution, by the overthrow of intermediary ruling bodies, he says this led to many challenging problems with inertia due to their fear of Jacobitism. The legislators, after the French Revolution, they trembled at the thought of any startling plan for correcting abuses. This fear, Fourier thought or belief, also accounted for the large standing army by which the masses were held in subjection. Which means even after the French Revolution, people were subjected to the whole idea of legitimacy through fear. So therefore, Charles Fourier is against all this. Finally, Charles Fourier became especially bitter when he treated the relation of the revolution to business and commerce. He felt that, that this great upheaval, the vicious tendencies of the business and commercial world is actually contemptuous in nature. And the revolutionary, first of all, what they did was they awarded commerce a high place in the society, and government, which was not entitled in that particular place. So therefore, by doing so, they give undue consideration to the merchants' effort to throw off the economic restrictions of the old regime, and they even acknowledge their demand for greater freedom from legal restraint, which means what has come out of the French Revolution was more of the space for the capitalists to grow. A space for the capitalists to grow. So therefore, Fourier believed that all these actually, the merchant who despised in antiquity, they attained such exalted status with the coming of the French Revolution, and this is what Charles Fourier says, that the sophists began to sing their praises, while economists with doctrines of laissez-faire and wealth of nation rationalize and extol their sordid calculation and political regimes. So which means it is more of one class now developing into another class, and they are the same class that control the society. So Charles Fourier argued that men of commerce use this high recognition to spoil the social body with every conceivable a species of infamy and crime. Speculators, he says, deliberately aggravated the perplexing problems which actually hung like a sword of Damocles, which means this all led to a lot of crisis in the society. So therefore, towards the close of the revolution, Charles Fourier found the position of business secure. Every insignificant market towns, Fourier says, boasted its stock exchange, and thought little about the rag crowd, which means the normal crowd became more unemployed, more paupered or impoverished, and the speculators or the traders or those who engage in stock exchange, they took over the palace of fine arts in Lyons, which means these become place of commerce and fine arts, and therefore he says the other morbid symptoms of decay of the revolution therefore is indicated by the increased occurrence of bankruptcy, intense competition, and the breakdown of rival tradesmen, and therefore there is an enormous increase of taxation, the concentration of capital, and the growth of monopoly. So therefore, what was expected of the French Revolution was nothing but every development into new capitalist environment, and therefore he related all these ills to the frequent attack upon property and recurring employment of Jacobins tactics by people who style themselves as liberals or by people who believe in liberty. So therefore he says practically every evil of the commercial world was complicated by liberation of the Jews, for by this step, he said, the revolutionists unleashed upon Western Europe a group of parasites devoted exclusively to commerce. So therefore, Charles Fourier even charged the Jews that the Jews believed themselves justified in the practice of slavery at the expense of the new non-Jewish society. So this is a different kind of topic. We will not go into that. But what Charles Fourier finally tried to tell us is he considered that the old regime presented the French nation and the world enough problems to justify radical corrections. It's not possible. There are enough problems to actually justify radical corrections. So absolutism, he says, is good only for man who exercises it. So therefore the revolution resulted from repressive measures which enslave and impoverish the masses, and from British attempt to dominate the commerce of the world, and therefore he contended, Charles Fourier contended that the cure, that the cure was wrong, rather revolution was wrong, and that those who applied it, those who used the method of violence and so on and so forth, did not honestly meet the challenge of reform. They did not really succeed in reforming the society. Therefore, the spokesmen of new humanitarianism, he says, are lacking a definite plan and adopted only destructive and negative methods. So their first concern on attaining power was to yoke and enslave the mass, to burden and to enslave the masses, and thus revolution gave birth to the very repression it was supposed to cure. He believed that the French Revolution gave birth to the kind of repression that they supposed to abolish. So Charles Fourier was particularly disappointed in Napoleon, because he acknowledged that the conqueror possessed prodigious genius, and he held in his very palm the key of universal harmony and happiness. Yet he did not react, and therefore, according to Charles Fourier analysis, he says this is because Napoleon possessed in him, he lays in him his greed, his conceit, and his simplicism. And this simplism caused him to concentrate his desire to the exclusion of his responsibility. Means he vacated his responsibility. So therefore, Charles Fourier concluded, or you can say that the final conclusion of Charles Fourier with regard to the French Revolution was that the only remedial measure which could have averted the bloodshed and the chaos of the revolution, and the kind of scourges which grew out of out of the adoption of the universal agriculture and industrial association would be to base social code of God, which means uh, it is through the process of allowing the social code of God to actually bring people together through the method of the passionate attraction or the interaction or the passionate attraction. So therefore, this code, he said, would be revealed to man only when man ceases to follow the dictates of the sophist and obeys without exception all of his own psychological impulses. And it is through these natural impulses that the Creator make himself known to man. So therefore, it is only through the process that people start believing their own instincts, start to believe that the change should come internally, that God has already given to us our instinct, that we will certainly desire for change, that what is constant is change, what is constant is interest, that we can move forward rather than through the process of creating so much of chaos in the society through this kind of upheaval, this kind of disorderly movement that has caused more life, that has brought in more depression rather than resolving those problems. Okay, so with this I will end my discussion on Charles Fourier reaction to French Revolution. If you have any question, kindly ask me now. Thank you very much.